Okay, so ready to dive into something a little unexpected.
Always up for a challenge.
I think when most of us think of ancient Egypt, you know, pyramids and pharaohs spring to mind.
Right, the classic images.
Yeah, but did you ever think about wine?
Wine.
Yeah, that's what we're looking at today. We're going on a deep dive into Egyptian wine, the history of it, the surprising comeback, and we're using this really interesting book called Egitto as our guide.
Sounds fascinating already.
Yeah, and I bet some listeners are probably thinking, wine in the desert. But that's kind of the point, right? That's what makes this so intriguing.
It really is such a stark contrast. We tend to think of this arid, desert landscape and these ancient monuments,
Right.
and we forget that this region has this long, rich history of viticulture.
Yeah, and Egitto really takes us back to the beginning, like way, way back.
Hmm.
There's evidence of wine production going back to the 3rd millennium BC.
Wow.
That's even before, the dynasties we usually associate with ancient Egypt. So this is old.
Really puts it into perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And what's more, wine wasn't just like a drink in ancient Egypt. It was so much more. It was woven into their entire culture, their religion, even their economy.
Egitto really brings that to life.
It does. Like, can you imagine pharaohs being buried with wine for the afterlife?
Talk about dedication to your beverage of choice.
Right. Like, what does that tell you about the importance of wine in their belief system?
I mean, it says a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah.
They truly believed that, earthly pleasures would continue in the afterlife. So it makes sense that wine, a symbol of, joy and abundance, would be included in their tombs. It's almost like they thought it was necessary for a good afterlife, like a good party.
Yeah, like a necessity, right.
Yeah.
Do you think, were there like specific types of wine that were considered like, I don't know, more worthy of being taken on this journey to the afterlife?
That's a great question.
Yeah, and Ejito also talks about the connection between wine and the gods.
Yep.
Like Osiris, the god of fertility, he was closely linked to like the vine cycle of, death and rebirth every season.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That cyclical nature of the vine, it was like a perfect reflection of Osiris's role as a god of vegetation and renewal.
Mm,
Really beautiful how they connected the natural world with their beliefs.
yeah. And then there's Sekhmet,
Ah, Sekhmet.
the fierce lion-headed goddess of war and healing.
Right.
But she also, kind of surprisingly, had this fondness for the, let's say, the more festive side of wine.
Right. Ichido even calls her the Lady of Drunkenness.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, war, healing, and partying.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. Sekhmet, she embodied both, the destructive and the healing forces of life.
Yep.
And wine, you can do that too, right? It can
Mhm.
intoxicate, it can bring people together. That duality's kind of there.
Yeah, I see that. So ancient Egypt, they really were a wine-loving civilization. But fast forward to today. After a long decline, Egyptian wine is making a comeback, which is kind of surprising, right? Egitto even points that out. And they raise the obvious question, how do you even grow grapes in such a harsh desert climate?
It's amazing, right? Ichido goes into these different, like the wine-producing regions of modern Egypt. It's not just one place. And you see how they've adapted, how they've even used the challenges to their advantage.
Yeah, like it's not all desert.
Exactly.
Like Egitto talks about these oases. It's almost like these secret gardens, hidden away in this vast desert. And the grapes thrive there because there are these natural springs. And then, of course, the Nile Delta, that's still crucial.
Right.
You have this fertile land, the waters of the Nile.
Absolutely. And then you've got like the coastal areas too, especially around Alexandria. They get that nice Mediterranean influence.
So different climates within Egypt.
Yeah, each one brings its own kind of microclimate, its own terroir to the table.
Yeah, but Egitto doesn't sugarcoat it. Like, they really paint a picture of just how tough it is, the
Yeah.
extreme heat, the struggle for water, the sandy soil. Like, these vines really have to fight to survive.
It's true. It's a testament to their resilience,
Hmm.
and the dedication of these winemakers who are like pushing the boundaries of what's possible in these tough conditions.
Yeah, it's pretty inspiring, honestly. And here's the really cool part. Egitto points out that it's not just, imported grapes. Egypt has its own traditional varieties, like grapes that have adapted over centuries to this intense environment.
Yeah, that's an important point.
Yeah.
It shows the depth of like the history of Egyptian viticulture. These aren't just any grapes.
Right.
These are varieties that have evolved specifically for these conditions.
Yeah, and they have such cool names too. Like Egitto mentions Baladi, a red grape, really robust. It's like a workhorse in this climate.
Oh yeah, Baladi.
And then there's Sfakri. It's a lighter red, kind of perfect for those super hot Egyptian days.
Right. And you can't forget Bonnie Salem. That's a white. And it's known for its ability to, like, handle even the most intense desert heat.
Wow, so it's like tasting a bit of history, right?
Absolutely.
When you taste these indigenous varieties, you're tasting something that's truly
A
Egyptian.
unique expression of the land.
Yeah, definitely going to try to find those. But, of course, Egito doesn't forget about the international favorites like Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Syrah for reds, Chardonnay, and Sauvignon Blanc for the whites. So they're there too.
Right, so there's something for everyone.
Yeah, it's like they're blending, the familiar with the unexpected. And speaking of pushing boundaries, Egito talks about how researchers are like working on these new climate resilient grape varieties.
Hmm.
Can you imagine like the future of wine being born in the Egyptian desert?
It's a pretty exciting thought.
Yeah.
Could these Egyptian winemakers, with all their knowledge of, growing in arid conditions, could they be leading a new era of winemaking?
It's possible.
It's really exciting to think about the possibilities.
Yeah, it is. But let's not forget about, the winemaking itself. Egito talks about how Egyptian winemaking today is this fascinating blend of tradition and modernity. Like you have high-tech stuff like precision irrigation, but then some producers are also reviving these ancient methods.
It's that, like, honoring the past while embracing the future. It's a
Yeah.
really cool mix.
And they're not just making like one kind of wine either.
Yeah.
Egito mentions reds, whites, rosés, even sparkling wines. It's like they're experimenting, showing their range.
It makes sense. They want to showcase that Egyptian wine is more than just, a novelty. They're producing wines that can compete globally.
Right. It's a real invitation to like explore, try something new. To give us a little taste of this wine scene, Egito spotlights a few key players.
Hmm.
First up, there's Domaine de Corum. They're on the Mediterranean coast. Beautiful spot. And they're known for like their focus on quality, sustainability. And they use this native grape, the Bonatti, which we know is pretty special.
What I find really cool about Domaine Decorum is their commitment to, like, expressing that unique Egyptian terroir, but doing it in a way that's, ethical and sustainable. It's impressive.
Totally. Then there's Janaclis Vineyards. They've been around since 1882, wow, based in the Alexandria region. And they seem to have really perfected this balance of tradition and innovation.
They've got a long history,
Yeah.
which means they've seen a lot of changes. To have lasted that long, they must have adapted and evolved, but without losing sight of their roots. That's really interesting to me.
And finally, there's Obelisk Vineyards. Now, these guys are the real pioneers. They're right in the heart of the desert. They're showing everyone that you can overcome even the most extreme conditions, if you have the will and the know-how.
That's pretty bold. Being in the Sahara Desert, that
Yeah.
takes guts. It's like they're saying, we're not afraid to push the limits. Yeah, it's a pretty inspiring story.
Yeah.
But Egito doesn't just, paint this super optimistic picture. They're honest about the fact that this industry is still young and it's got its fair share of challenges. Water scarcity is a big one, obviously.
Yeah.
And then there's the competition. You've got all these established wine regions around the world.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that this comeback is still a work in progress. But Egito also points out, like, there's so much potential, so many opportunities that make this such an exciting time for Egyptian wine. I mean, you've got this unique terroir like nowhere else in the world.
Right.
And the tourism industry is growing. People are looking for these authentic, like, off the beaten path experiences.
Absolutely.
And you have this new generation of winemakers. They're so passionate, so creative.
It's a really dynamic combination.
Yeah.
All these factors coming together, it creates this environment where the Egyptian wine industry can really, like, flourish.
Yeah.
They have a chance to get global recognition.
Yeah, it really does feel like the beginning of something special. And speaking of tourism, Egito brings up this idea of enotourism in Egypt.
Mm.
Imagine this.
Mm.
Instead of just, looking at the pyramids, you're wandering through these beautiful vineyards, you're tasting amazing wines, and you've got this, like, stunning view of the Nile River.
Oh, wow.
I mean, talk about a sensory overload.
That's taking it to a whole other level.
Right. It's not just sightseeing.
No.
It's like total immersion. And Egito makes a good point. This whole enotourism thing, it's good for everyone. Tours get these incredible experiences.
Yeah.
And the winemakers get more exposure.
Right. It introduces their wines to a wider audience.
Mm-hmm.
Potentially, more sales, more recognition for all their hard work.
Exactly. So what does this like enotourism look like in Egypt? Egito gives us some examples.
Right.
So you've got the classic winery tours, the tastings. You can learn about how the wine's made, sample the different varieties.
Makes sense.
But they also suggest, like, incredible food pairings, local Egyptian cuisine, fresh ingredients.
Oh, like what kind of pairings?
Well, imagine like our rich Egyptian red wine with, I don't know, a traditional tagine,
Hmm.
or maybe a crisp white wine with some, fresh seafood from the Mediterranean.
That sounds amazing.
Right. It's like this fusion of flavors, a real taste of Egypt. And then there are these festivals, like the Giza Wine Festival. You get to try all these different Egyptian wines. There's music, entertainment.
And all with the pyramids in the background.
Yeah. Talk about an unforgettable
It's like
experience.
they're creating this whole experience that celebrates everything that's amazing about Egypt. The
Yeah.
culture, the history, the food, and they're using wine to bring it all together.
I love that. It's like Egito has not only, opened our eyes to Egyptian wine, but it's also made us want to experience it ourselves. Like go there, see it, taste it.
It really has. It's not just about the past, it's about what's happening now. Every bottle that's made, every vineyard that's planted, every tourist who discovers this amazing wine region, it's all part of this story that's still being written.
Yeah, it's a great reminder that we're not just passive observers, like our choices as consumers, they matter.
Hmm.
When we choose to try these, like, lesser known wines, we're actually supporting this whole industry, this culture, this legacy that's being revived.
That's a good point.
And who knows, maybe we'll discover our new favorite wine. Maybe it'll even rival those, ancient vintages that the pharaohs enjoyed.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, there are so many possibilities when it comes to wine. In the Egyptian wine industry, it's proving that amazing wine can come from the most unexpected places.
So I think if we're going to sum up this whole deep dive into Egyptian wine, the message is clear. It's time to, look beyond the pyramids.
Yeah.
There's this hidden treasure waiting to be discovered. It's time to celebrate the past, the present, and the future of Egyptian wine.
A drink that has, fascinated people for thousands of years,
Hmm.
and now it's ready to captivate the world all over again.
Absolutely. And to all our listeners out there, I encourage you, go explore. Seek out these Egyptian wines. Try those unique indigenous varieties.
Mm-hmm.
Raise a glass to, the resilience of those vines, the creativity of the winemakers, the spirit of this amazing civilization that, like, revered wine as a gift from the gods. Cheers to new discoveries.
Cheers. And may your next glass of wine be filled with, like, the echoes of history, the thrill of finding something new and amazing.
It really makes you wonder what those ancient wines actually tasted like.
Right? Like, were they anything like the wines we have today or completely different?
I know it's a question that's, intrigued people for centuries.
Oh, for sure. Historians, wine lovers, everyone wants to know.
Yeah, and while we can't, like, recreate those exact flavors,
Right.
we can get some clues
Yeah,
from archaeology and those old texts.
exactly.
And some researchers think that those ancient Egyptian wines were often pretty sweet and heavily spiced,
It's interesting.
reflecting the tastes of the time.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I always kind of pictured them as like, bold and full-bodied reds given the climate.
Mm.
But thinking about them being sweet and spiced, it makes me think about, food pairings.
Yeah.
Egito touches on that a bit, but I'd love to hear your take on how those ancient wines would have, like, gone with ancient Egyptian food.
Oh, that's a fun one to think about. We know they used a lot of honey, dates, figs, all kinds of spices.
Right, lots of flavor.
Exactly. So it's not hard to imagine those sweet spiced wines would have been, like, perfect with those flavors, creating this really amazing dining experience.
Yeah, a total sensory experience. It makes
Mhm.
you want to hop in a time machine and go to an ancient Egyptian feast.
I know, right?
But Egito reminds us that the story of Egyptian wine isn't just about the past. It's still unfolding right now.
Yeah.
With every bottle, every vineyard, and every person who discovers this amazing wine region.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole deep dive so compelling. It's not just a history lesson. It's like an invitation to be part of this modern revival. When we seek out and enjoy these Egyptian wines,
Yeah.
we're not just drinking. We're
Hmm.
supporting an entire industry, a culture, a tradition that's coming back to life.
It's a good reminder that our choices, what we choose to buy and drink, they can make a difference.
They do.
By choosing to explore these wines, we're part of their comeback story.
I like that.
And who knows, maybe we'll even find a new favorite that's just as good as those ancient wines the pharaohs enjoyed.
Maybe we will. You never know what you'll discover.
Hmm.
And the Egyptian wine industry is showing us that truly great wines can come from anywhere.
Exactly. So to wrap up our deep dive into the world of Egyptian wine, I think the message is pretty clear. It's time to go beyond the pyramids and
Absolutely.
uncover this hidden treasure.
Yeah.
It's time to raise a glass to the past, present, and future of Egyptian
A
wine.
drink that has fascinated people for centuries and is ready to do it all over again.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Cheers to that.
Cheers.